See, many people see water baptism and spiritual awakening as two completely separate things. But what's interesting is that in a way they're actually very similar because their end goal is ultimately the same. Okay, so water baptism. Some of you may already know this, but for the ones who don't, water baptism originates from Christianity, right? And you see it practiced across many other Christian denominations, right? Christians specifically associate water baptism with being born again. And drawing this from the Bible, particular John chapter 3, verse 5, which states, "Verily, truly, I tell you, no one can enter the kingdom of God unless they are born of the water and spirit." Okay, so religious teachings within Christianity often take this quite literally. According to this belief, we are born into the world as sinners. And it isn't really enough to simply be compliant, be a good person, attend church, read the Bible, pray to God, and spread the word. Um, so no matter how clean your heart is, it simply isn't enough if you do not get baptized. No matter how many good deeds you perform, they are considered insufficient without water baptism. And this is how Christians often portray it. So, what exactly is water baptism? Okay, so the church describes, and scriptures in the Bible, they describe water baptism as a ritual. In they don't really use the word ritual, but it kind of is a ritual, and in which a person is immersed in water as a public declaration of their faith in Jesus Christ. So, once they undergo this ritual, their past sins are understood to be washed away. They become someone new. They become someone who is pure, someone who has been given a fresh start, and basically now has an inward commitment to follow Jesus and the plans that God and Jesus have ordained for them. So, water baptism is death and resurrection. So it is the death of the old self, the secular self, the flesh, and the resurrection of the new self, the one who is pure and now in a state of oneness with Christ himself. Now, if you are spiritual or already on the spiritual path, this concept of water baptism may sound or even seem and even feel familiar to you. And when I say familiar, I mean spiritual awakening. Um, because that's exactly what a spiritual awakening is, right? It's the death of the old self, the resurrection of the new self, Well, yeah, there's a resurrection of the new self that emerges from it, right? But here's the thing, there is a difference, right? And I'm going to tell you what that difference is. Water baptism can make a person feel instantly renewed. And you may have come across people in your life or who you may know of who have actually undergone water baptism and shared that as soon as they come up out of the water, they instantly feel cleansed, okay? They feel different. They feel pure, as if their past sins and even their past lives no longer have an effect on them. Like even their habits seem to disappear and they no longer have the same desire for the secular life. And it's true, many people have shared this experience immediately after water baptism. And I will tell you why. I'll tell you why this experience is quite universal, as it is a spiritual rebirth, an elicited spiritual awakening, but it's a very progressive spiritual awakening. And Christians may not view it as a spiritual awakening because spiritual awakening is often associated with New Age spirituality. But that is essentially what I believe it is, okay? And so here's the thing. I want to say okay? Because this is my own personal understanding of it. I can't really speak for everyone else, and who knows, okay? But I believe it is temporary. And this is the thing, all religions, including spirituality or what is often called New Age spirituality, however you choose to view them, they ultimately have the same end goal, which is enlightenment. That is the goal, essentially. And despite the different ways they navigate towards it, the underlying aim is spiritual enlightenment, a connection and oneness with the divine. So here's why I say water baptism is temporary. It resets emotional states. It is a ritual in that way. It helps the person align themselves onto what they believe is the right path, basically their higher self. And in order for someone to become aligned with that path, they need to enter a more voided state. And that's what water baptism can do. The act of water itself, okay, for those who are spiritual, you'll know this. Water itself is highly energetic, highly impressionable, and it can hold intention, consciousness, and vibration. So when someone, such as a priest or a nun, who has a strong belief in the doctrine and in the power of water baptism, when they perform the ritual on someone who has complete faith in what is happening, that person can generally feel renewed. It's similar in a way to how a curse or witchcraft can affect a person through belief, intention, and perception. But people who go through water baptism can, they feel absolutely brand new afterwards. But the thing is, they often eventually slide back into the secular life. See, the effects of water baptism, the ritual itself, naturally fades over time. And water baptism can create a powerful emotional and energetic peak. The collective energy of the church, the emotional vulnerability of the person, the symbolic cleansing of the water can act as a kind of spiritual bypass. It temporarily lifts the person above their everyday ego and trauma. But because the underlying emotional wounds, coping mechanisms, unhealthy habits, and subconscious programming were not actually resolved, the person did not actually truly sit with them, face them, and process them. They were actually washed over temporarily through the baptism. And the person can, in that way, eventually revert once the emotional high of the ritual wears off. The old subconscious patterns can emerge, dragging them back towards their old habits. So with spiritual awakening, which again is similar to water baptism, the difference is that spiritual awakening without water baptism happens organically. And because of this, I believe it can definitely change a person indefinitely. So spiritual awakenings often happen through life situations. People and life events can act as catalysts that force us to heal, face our shadow, understand our triggers, and essentially help us become our higher selves. So the friction, the heartbreak, and the suffering caused by our daily human interactions force us as individuals to look inward, break down the ego, and reconstruct our understanding of reality. So it's very messy, unchoreographed, and it happens outside of a church. But here's the thing. When a person undergoes this kind of organic spiritual awakening, their mindset rarely ever completely reverts back. It becomes inevitable that they start noticing things differently. So true awakening is an expansion of consciousness. It's like once you see the matrix of your own psychology and what you believe to be the truth of the universe, you simply cannot unsee it. And this is because the awakening was earned through your own internal processing rather than given to you through a priest or a church ritual. You own it permanently, and it becomes a shift in your fundamental identity, not just a temporary state of grace. And the thing is, spiritual awakenings happen in increments. With each stage and each phase, another awakening takes place. You only ever upgrade. You never ever truly revert. You may feel as though you are reverting sometimes, but you feel a bit stagnant. But the difference is that you never completely get sucked back into the old secular life or mindset. It becomes increasingly difficult to do so because you've already seen beyond it and you've already started integrating parts of yourself, So it's like one changes the surface and the other changes what lies beneath it. So one relies on something outside of you to thrive, while the other relies on your inwardness to thrive. And the person who relies on their inwardness is the one who has cultivated that lost reliance on themselves and developed their own inner strength. So it's like the person whose awakening depends entirely on the church, priests, or God himself to bring it about may always find themselves falling apart when that external source is no longer providing the same emotional, spiritual state. It becomes much harder for them to pick up the pieces because they have not learned to rely on their own inwardness. But ultimately, they both have the same end goal, which is enlightenment, oneness, and becoming your highest, most aligned self.